The warning no one believed. Admiral Chiron stood on the bridge of the Zephyrian command ship, his 4 eyes narrowed at the flashing red alert on the holoscreen. A distress signal had just arrived from the outer rim, near the abandoned sector where no intelligent species dared to travel. The message was short, broken by static, but the words were clear. Unknown warship, massive, unstoppable. Raryan. Then silence. Chiron let out a frustrated hiss. Another false alarm. Another malfunctioning probe sending useless data. He had seen this too many times before. Dismiss it, he ordered. But Admiral, his tactical officer, Vokrin, said hesitantly. This report came from Outpost 73, the one monitoring the Terran sectors. At the mention of Terrans, Chiron frowned. The humans. The strange, unpredictable species that had somehow managed to survive despite being physically weaker than most advanced civilizations. They had been left alone, ignored by the great empires. They were not a threat. Chiron sighed. What does the report say? Vokrin hesitated before bringing up the full transmission. Sir, the outpost detected a massive human warship moving at high speed. The size is unprecedented. It's larger than our dreadnoughts, and its energy readings are off the charts. The ship is heading directly toward our borders. Chiron let out a cold laugh. Humans don't have warships that big. Their fleet is a joke compared to ours. This must be a mistake. But, sir, Vokrin pressed, the outpost crew sent multiple scans. And then, a minute later, they vanished. Silence filled the bridge. Chiron's amusement faded. Vanished. Yes, Admiral. No distress call. No emergency beacon. One moment they were there. And then, gone. A heavy tension settled over the command deck. Chiron finally stood up from his chair, walking toward the main display. He zoomed in on the last known coordinates of Outpost 73. Nothing remained. No wreckage, no radiation signature, no debris. Just emptiness. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Could this truly be a human warship? If so, what had they built? Just then, another alert flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. Unknown origin. Vokrin's hand shook as he activated the signal. The screen flickered, and then a voice filled the bridge. It was deep calm, yet carried an undeniable weight of authority. This is Captain Elias Drake of the UHF Revenant. You are in violation of our no-fly zone. Stand down, or be erased. The bridge fell silent. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Chiron felt fear. Admiral Chiron's fingers twitched as he stared at the screen, his mind racing. A human warship had sent them a warning, a threat. The very idea was absurd. Humans had always been an afterthought in the grand scheme of galactic power. Their fleet was laughably small, their technology outdated compared to the great empires of the cosmos. And yet, Outpost 73 was gone. Trace that signal. Chiron barked, his voice sharper than he intended. Vokrin's hands flew across the controls, analyzing the transmission. The results came back instantly. Sir, the signal origin is extremely close. Less than a light hour away, Vokrin reported. His voice carried something unusual. Fear. Chiron's stomach twisted. That was impossible. No ship could cross that distance so quickly. Impossible, he muttered. Scan the area again. His command was already unnecessary. The ship's long-range sensors flickered erratically, struggling to process something huge approaching at high speed. Then the proximity alarm screamed. Boom! The Zephyrian flagship shuddered as something massive broke into real space. The bridge was bathed in crimson light as emergency systems activated. Every officer turned toward the viewing screen, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The human warship had arrived. It was a nightmare given form. A leviathan of blackened steel, its hull gleaming with an unnatural darkness that seemed to drink in the surrounding light. The Zephyrian dreadnoughts, massive by any standard, looked tiny compared to the behemoth before them. Its design was nothing like any known human craft, sharp, angular, and predatory. And worst of all, it was silent. No signals, no demands, no threats, just the cold, menacing presence of something not meant to exist. "Sir, what is that thing?" a junior officer whispered, his voice trembling. Chiron couldn't answer. His mind reeled. No species, none, had built something this large, this fast, and with such an overwhelming aura of finality. Then, finally, the ship moved. A low, humming sound vibrated through the void as energy readings spiked off the charts. "Admiral," Vakhrin shouted, panic gripping his voice. "That thing is charging weapons." Chiron snapped back into command mode. "Defensive positions. Raise shields to maximum. I want every ship ready to fire on my command." The Xipherian fleet scrambled, hundreds of warships shifting into formation. Plasma turrets rotated, missile bays locked on, and their most advanced weapons systems prepared to unleash devastation. Chiron clenched his fists. This was just a bluff. It had to be. "Open a channel to the enemy ship," he ordered. Vakhrin hesitated but complied. A second later, the audio link connected. "This is Admiral Chiron of the Xipherian Dominion. You are in restricted space. Identify yourself, or we will open fire." For a long moment, there was silence. The human warship did not respond. It merely drifted closer. And then, a voice. "You already know who we are." It was calm, cold, devoid of any concern. And then, without further warning, the warship fired. A single shot. One of the Xipherian dreadnoughts, one of the most powerful warships in the fleet, vanished. Not exploded, not shattered, just gone. A gaping void remained where the ship had been. No debris, no wreckage. It was as if it had never existed. The bridge erupted in chaos. Officers shouted, alarms wailed, and panic spread like wildfire. Chiron's heart pounded as he stared at the screen in disbelief. One shot. One ship erased. For the first time in his life, Admiral Chiron realized something horrifying. They were not fighting a war. They were witnessing an execution. Admiral Chiron stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. One moment, the Xipherian dreadnought Titan's Wrath had been there, its shields active, its weapons locked onto the human warship. The next moment, it was gone. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where the mighty vessel had once floated. The bridge was in chaos. Officers shouted over one another. Alarms blared, and sensor screens flickered wildly, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. But there was nothing to comprehend. The human warship had fired one shot. One. And it had simply erased one of the most advanced warships in the Xipherian fleet. This is impossible," Vakhrin stammered, his scaled hands gripping the console in front of him. "No weapon in the galaxy does that. Where is the wreckage? Where is the—" "There is no wreckage," Chiron interrupted, his voice hollow. He forced himself to focus, to suppress the rising fear clawing at his chest. The ship didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It was. He trailed off, unable to find the words. "Erased," a voice whispered. The bridge fell silent. Every officer turned toward the sound. It had come from Lieutenant Arvel, the youngest tactical officer on the ship. His pale green skin had turned almost white, and his eyes were locked onto his console. "The ship was erased," he repeated, his voice shaking. "Not destroyed. Not vaporized. It was as if it had never been there at all." Chiron swallowed hard. He had seen countless battles. He had fought against fleets armed with superweapons, world-breaking cannons, and devastating antimatter missiles. But nothing in the history of galactic warfare behaved like this. This was not destruction. This was something else entirely. "Sir," another officer called out, "incoming transmission." Chiron turned sharply. From who? The officer hesitated. It's the human warship, sir. Silence gripped the bridge. Every Zypharian officer stood rigid, their eyes flicking toward the massive blackened warship that still hovered motionless in space, as if waiting. Zyron inhaled deeply and steadied himself. Put it through. A moment later, the speakers crackled to life. But there was no grand declaration of war, no demand for surrender. Just one sentence. This is your only warning. The voice was cold, emotionless, final. Then the transmission cut off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zyron felt something deep inside him shift. It was not just the fear of battle, not just the terror of facing a superior enemy. No, this was something worse. It was the realization that they were completely outmatched. Sir, Vulcran's voice was barely above a whisper. What do we do? Zyron clenched his jaw. The answer should have been obvious. The Zypharian Dominion did not retreat. They did not cower before lesser species. And yet, as he stared at the monstrosity floating before them, he felt a creeping sensation that defied every military instinct he had. He felt the urge to run. Before he could speak, the human warship moved. It was slow, deliberate. The behemoth shifted forward, gliding through space with an eerie grace, closing the distance between itself and the Zypharian fleet. It was hunting them. Admiral, a panicked voice called out. They're charging weapons again. The words snapped Zyron out of his trance. No, he would not stand there and watch his fleet be erased like insects. All ships, fire everything, he roared. In an instant, the Zypharian fleet responded. Hundreds of warships unleashed their full firepower. Plasma cannons, neutron torpedoes, hyperrail slugs, every weapon system they had, pouring destruction toward the human vessel. The darkness of space was set ablaze with blinding streaks of energy, each shot powerful enough to shatter a moon. And then, silence. The human warship did not dodge. It did not raise shields. It did not even attempt to return fire. It simply let the Zypharian weapons hit. And nothing happened. The energy blasts and missiles reached the warship's hull and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed. They just ceased to exist. That's impossible, someone gasped. Zyron watched in horror as his fleet's greatest weapons were rendered meaningless. This wasn't a war. This was a nightmare. And the human warship was not finished. It began charging again. Zyron's blood ran cold. The last shot had erased one of their most powerful ships in an instant. What would this one do? All ships, evasive maneuvers, he bellowed. Break formation. Now. But it was too late. A single silent pulse radiated from the warship's core. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, in the blink of an eye, half of the Zypharian fleet simply vanished. Not destroyed, not scattered into debris. Just gone. Zyron's breath caught in his throat. This was not an enemy they could fight. This was something far worse. This was the end. Zyron couldn't breathe. Half the fleet was gone. Not in flames, not in wreckage. Just erased. He turned to his crew, expecting someone to scream, to panic, to do anything. But they all just stood there, frozen in shock. The Zypharian Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing species, conquering worlds, obliterating entire civilizations. And yet, in the span of mere moments, they were the ones being wiped away like dust. The human warship remained still, its silent, terrifying presence more menacing than any fleet Zyron had ever faced. It didn't need to move. It didn't need to dodge. It didn't need to defend itself. Every attack against it was useless, like throwing pebbles at a black hole. And yet, it had not fired again. That fact alone disturbed Zyron more than anything. This was not mindless destruction. The humans were not acting in a blind rage. No, this was controlled, precise, calculated. "Sir, the rest of the fleet is in disarray." Vulcran's voice was hoarse, shaken beyond anything Chiron had ever heard. "Some ships are fleeing. Others are requesting orders. What do we do?" What could they do? There was no strategy against an enemy that defied physics itself. There was no formation that would stop a ship that could erase entire dreadnoughts with a thought. But surrender? No, the Xipherian Dominion did not surrender. Before Chiron could speak, the comms crackled again. A transmission. From the human warship. The bridge fell deathly silent. No one moved as the chilling voice from before returned, echoing across the deck like a whispered prophecy of doom. "You were warned." Chiron clenched his fists. He was the admiral of an empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds. He would not be spoken to like an insect. "Identify yourself." He barked into the transmission. "Who commands this ship?" There was a pause. Then, finally, the voice returned, calm but edged with something colder than space itself. "You don't understand, Admiral." The bridge screens flickered. The main display, which once showed a tactical map of the battlefield, now displayed something else, a planet. Xiphar Prime, the heart of the Dominion. Chiron's blood turned to ice. "How do you have this feed?" There was no answer. Instead, they watched in horror as something entered the screen. A second human warship. No, not just a second one. Dozens. Xiphar Prime, the capital of their mighty empire, was now under the shadow of an entire fleet of these nightmares. "Your fleet here," the human voice continued, almost bored, "was never the real target." The transmission cut off. And then, without a sound, the human warship before them vanished. Not into hyperspace. Not through any recognizable means of FTL travel. It simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been there at all. And Admiral Chiron, for the first time in his long, victorious career, felt true fear. Chiron stood frozen, his mind racing to process the impossible reality before him. The tactical screen still displayed Xiphar Prime, the heart of the Dominion, the very core of their power. And now, it was under siege by an enemy they had barely begun to comprehend. The fleet of human warships hung over their homeworld like silent gods of war, waiting, watching. The bridge of Chiron's flagship remained eerily silent, as if everyone feared that even the sound of their own breath might trigger the wrath of the invaders. The Xipherian Dominion had waged war for centuries, their military unmatched, their fleets spanning countless systems. They had crushed rebellions, shattered alliances, and rewritten the history of entire species. But never had they faced an enemy like this, an enemy that did not just overpower them, but rendered their might utterly meaningless. A deep, uneasy breath filled Chiron's lungs. He turned to his officers, forcing himself to maintain control. "We need immediate scans of Xiphar Prime," he ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. "Find out what they are doing. Are they attacking? Demanding surrender? What do they want?" The crew scrambled to comply, their fingers moving over control panels with frantic urgency. A few tense seconds passed before the results came in. "Sir," one of the officers hesitated, his voice shaking. They aren't firing. They're just hovering in low orbit. No movement. No communications." Chiron's brow furrowed. No bombardment. No demands. Why? His mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Then the comms crackled to life again, and that same cold human voice filled the bridge. "We gave you a chance." Chiron's breath hitched. He gritted his teeth and stepped forward. "What do you want?" he demanded. "If you think you can intimidate us into surrender." "No." The single word carried the weight of finality, more devastating than any weapon. The human warship in front of them had not left. It had simply disappeared from their sensors. Now, it reappeared once more, this time directly above them. Chiron barely had time to react before the lights on the bridge flickered, and a deep, thrumming hum reverberated through the hull. Every system on the flagship went dark. Every weapon, every shield, every thruster. Cyron's hands clenched into fists as a chilling realization settled over him. The humans had complete control. Across the fleet, distress calls poured in, captains reporting the same fate. The Zypharian Dominion's mighty armada had just been reduced to powerless, floating husks. Cyron stared at the blank screens, his own reflection visible in the dead monitors. This was not war. This was an execution. And for the first time in history, the Dominion was completely and utterly helpless. Cyron could hear the panicked breathing of his crew. The bridge, once filled with the constant hum of machinery, was now eerily silent except for the occasional flicker of emergency lights. Every screen remained dark, every weapon useless, every thruster unresponsive. The Zypharian fleet, the pride of the Dominion, had been reduced to lifeless driftwood in the vastness of space. He swallowed hard, his mind racing for solutions. Restore power, he barked. Override whatever they did. Get our systems back online. The officers scrambled, fingers tapping frantically against the dead consoles. One by one, they tried emergency resets, manual reboots, even auxiliary power reroutes. Nothing. A voice, thick with terror, broke the tense silence. "Sir, it's not just us." Cyron turned sharply. The officer's trembling hand pointed to a nearby screen, one of the few still barely functional. It displayed the status of every Zypharian warship in the fleet. All were dark. Not a single ship had movement. Not a single ship had power. This wasn't just an attack. It was a demonstration. The humans had not fired a single shot, and yet they had already won. A sharp beep shattered the tense air. It was the communication system, somehow still active. And then, the cold, mechanical voice of the humans returned. "Your empire is over. Surrender." Cyron's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. His pride screamed at him to resist, to fight until the last breath. The Dominion had stood for millennia. They had crushed rebellions, broken civilizations, and rewritten history. They did not surrender. But what choice did they have? The crew turned to him, waiting for an order, waiting for hope. Cyron took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We cannot fight an enemy that can do this," he admitted, the weight of those words crushing his soul. Another officer hesitated before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they are merciful?" Cyron laughed bitterly. Merciful? No empire had ever been truly merciful in war. The Zypharians had seen it countless times. When a civilization fell, it was either enslaved or erased. And yet, the humans hadn't obliterated them. Not yet. The cold voice spoke again, this time with a finality that sent shivers through every Zypharian on the bridge. "Decide now, or there will be nothing left to save." A timer appeared on the remaining screen. 10 minutes. Cyron clenched his jaw, his mind at war with itself. This was more than a battle now, it was survival. And he wasn't sure if the Dominion had any way to survive the storm that was coming. Cyron's mind raced as the countdown ticked mercilessly downward, each passing second carving a deeper wound into his pride, into the very foundation of everything the Zypharian Dominion had believed for millennia. That they were untouchable, that they were the rightful rulers of the galaxy, that no force, no species, no insignificant upstart civilization could ever hope to challenge their dominion, let alone bring it to its knees without so much as firing a single shot, without even deploying an armada, without needing anything other than the presence of a single monstrous human warship looming silently in the void, radiating a power so absolute that it left even the most battle-hardened Zypharian commanders paralyzed with fear. The bridge crew sat frozen in their seats, their eyes darting between the flickering countdown on the dimly glowing screen and their leader, waiting for him to make the decision that would determine not only their fates, but the fate of their entire species, of every Zypharian world, colony, and outpost that still foolishly believed in the invincibility of their empire, unaware that in this moment, on this very battlefield, Their legacy teetered on the edge of oblivion, balanced precariously between surrender and annihilation, between an existence defined by humiliation and submission, or one that ended in the cold, merciless embrace of total destruction at the hands of an enemy they had once dismissed as primitive, as unworthy of even being considered a threat. Xiron's claws dug so deeply into the armrests of his chair that the reinforced material cracked beneath his grip, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like an unrelenting gravity, crushing his spirit, suffocating his defiance, forcing him to confront the bitter reality that no amount of pride, no amount of resistance, no last-ditch effort to fight back would amount to anything more than a pathetic act of desperation, a futile attempt to strike at an enemy that had already proven it was beyond their reach, beyond their understanding, beyond anything the Xipherians had ever encountered in their long and brutal history of conquest. The timer continued its cruel descent, every tick echoing like a drum of war inside his skull, and with a deep, shuddering breath, he realized that he no longer had a choice, that his personal pride, his hatred, his desperate desire to defy the impossible had to be cast aside, because the alternative, the complete and utter erasure of everything the Xipherians had built, was a price far too great to pay, even for a ruler who had spent his entire life believing in the absolute supremacy of his kind. And so, with a voice that felt foreign to his own throat, dry and cracked with the weight of a decision he had never imagined himself making, he uttered the words that would change the course of history. "Transmit our surrender." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion, heavier than any battle, heavier than any war ever fought in the history of the galaxy, because it was the silence of an empire falling, not in fire and ruin, not in glorious combat, but in the quiet, suffocating realization that they had been defeated before they had even begun to fight.